Hi guys, Ringo here. The Battle Bunny is out in War of the Visions, and to be honest, she is quite insane. I'll talk later about the impact I think she'll have on the meta, but I've seen a lot of scrims in Guild Battle using her at level 115, and she, paired with Ibarra, Charlotte, and or Cloud, has been able to reliably beat light teams and wind teams. So the only thing that really stops them right now has been Earth teams, which is to be expected from an element that has a counter. So we'll talk about that later, but today we'll cover what she does, what are her strengths and weaknesses, her kit, which teammates I think are the best for her, how to tune her AI, and how to build her. So lots of stuff on the table. Let's begin. Esther is a character that I would define as a bruiser. She has incredible bulk against physical attacks. She's got the resistances that are very, very high. She's resistant to debuffs quite highly as well. And she's got good defense too, plus 10k HP easily. So she is quite hard to remove from the bulk from physical attacks, but also from magical attacks. She does have an innate magic weakness, but the fact she has so much HP and courage makes it so that it still takes 3 hits for a mage to really take her out, and maybe 5-6 hits from physical attackers if they're not chaining on her. So really quite an impressive stat line. She is fairly accurate, but she doesn't really have a guaranteed hit. So against a full evade team, unless you build her for accuracy, you will still struggle. She has close to Cloud's levels of damage, but doesn't have the chaining that he has. So I would say she's still a little bit behind him in terms of damage. And then she's got one of the most terrible ranges for recent units. Usually these units have a lot of abilities with range 4 or 5 or even 6. She caps at range 4 except for Taunting Blade that has a really, really high AP cost. So it is difficult-ish to use her in that sense, but since she's so tanky, it's not that big a deal if the enemy gets the first hit on her. Then her mastery ability gives her, buffs for lightning units as usual, and gives her HP, slash resistance, and pierce resistance, so you can already see the theme. She is made to stay on the battlefield for a long time. She is a great sword user that uses hats and cloth, which is a major disadvantage. I wish she used helmets and or armor for Kane's TMR or for Rob's TMR, but she is limited to only clothing. To be honest though, in terms of TMRs, I think you'll pretty much always want to run something like Bells on her, because she is extremely AP hungry. All her abilities have pretty high AP costs, and there's nothing in her kit to really mitigate that. Now, before we look at her stats, let's talk about the gear that's being released alongside her. First, her TMR is actually really interesting. It gives HP, defense, and agility of 6, which is really good. I love agility on a TMR, especially with runes. You can make that piece of gear to give you 12 agility if you wanted to, which is kind of insane. Then, the active buff will make you immune to defense break in an AoE while increasing your critical rate. I don't know whether the ability will be useful that often, but since there are quite a few units that rely on defensive breaks in specific matchups, you could leverage that very well. Otherwise, if you don't need the TMR ability on someone, you could use that just as a TMR that has really good stats and that as an accessory can be equipped on just about anybody. And then the item you get from her bingo board is her sword, which I believe is better than the Buster Sword. It gives you 30 lightning attacks, so just as much as Cloud's weapon, and then 30 slash resistance penetration. Why is this better than the Buster Sword? It's just in the numbers, really. With the addition of runes, it is quite easy to add slash attack 10 or slash attack resistance 10 to an item, which will not stack with the other buffs. So the Buster Sword, which gives you slash attack of 15, only gives you 5 more than what you can have on her own weapon if you have a rune that gives you slash attack 10. Whereas if you equip the Buster Sword with slash attack penetration, you only have 10 compared to 30 on the other end. So it is strictly better in my opinion, and you'll probably want to run this on her, or if you're not using her, run this on Cloud instead. It's going to be an improvement. Now, let's look at her stats, and I am comparing her to Cloud, but I think it's not a good comparison. I think Cloud is more of a squishy unit. He relies on reflex or some amounts of AoE resistance to survive, but when he gets targeted, he usually goes down very quick. So I've also added as a second comparison somebody that has a unit that I define as a stat stick, someone that just has crazy stats all around, which is Oberon, and Esther still wins compared to him, so it's quite impressive. 4700 HP is tank range. She does get past the 10,000 mark quite easily, which is very impressive. At 572, her attack is also very, very high. It's comparable to Alstoria, who is going to be basically the god of water units in a short while, and Esther has more HP, comparable attack, comparable agility, really just Astoria level stats all around, which is quite impressive. Over Cloud, she's got more HP, more attack, the same agility, more defense, better resistances with 25 slash, 25 pierce. She does have a 15 weakness to magic, but honestly, it's not the end of the world. And then if we compare her to a unit like Oberon, who has crazy stats usually in fights, she still has more HP, more attack, more agility. So just overall, her stat line is insane. And I would say her kit might not be the best, but because of those crazy stats, she becomes a terrific unit. So let's look at her kit next. First, in terms of passives, she has her unique passive that gives her 10 defense, 40 defense penetration, and decreases magic resistance by 8. I'm not a big fan of decreased magic resistance, and because of this, I think she is better ran with a tank that's going to take these hits. If the magic attack is an AoE, she has really good ways to mitigate that. You could run Ibarra's Vision card for 20 AoE resistance, and then she's got her own buff that she can use to increase AoE resistance further, negating most of the magic damage she would take. And then the 40 defense penetration really makes her more efficient if she's hitting a tank. If you don't like that weakness, you could also run Holy Knight's Protection. Because of her high HP, it does give her quite a boost, but I think in most fights you'll want the Ball Lightning Barrier and Thief Lore. Her move up from Thief Lore is a must. Because she has such a low range, you'll end up just never hitting enemies in some fights if you don't have that, so I think it's really good. And the agility up makes her comparable in agility to somebody like Starlet Elena, which is very important so that she doesn't get chained down too much. She doesn't have any ability that increases her own agility mid-fight or decreases the enemies, so if you don't increase her agility as much as you can when the fight begins, she will eventually get lapped. Then in terms of counter abilities, there's not a lot of variation here. You either get physical damage mitigation or a chance to increase agility when you get hit, and frankly, I think I'd rather just stack another bit of stat on her, give her the physical damage mitigation, and call it a day. In some matchups is going to be great, but if you're fighting a bunch of mages, why not put quick action instead? Then let's look at her main job, and it is filled with a lot of stuff. It's going to be small on screen, I'm sorry. One thing you'll notice, all these abilities have short range, as I said. She does have some moves that have a height range of 2, so that's really good. She doesn't have to worry that much about differences in elevation. And then she has a lot of defensive buffs. So her basic move deals damage, decreases attack. That's kind of a standard thing. Then she has a self buff that increases Pierce, Strike, Missile resistance by 20, and then her own accuracy. If you're fighting an evasion team, you will have to turn off some other skills for this to be cast early, because she doesn't have any accuracy up in her passives. So even though she's been advertised as a very accurate unit, if you don't have this buff up when you meet an enemy, you're not going to be that accurate. You're going to be just as accurate as Ibarra would be with her Counterman Slash, which is not that impressive. So keep that in mind. The one ability you end up having to turn off would probably be her Barrier, because she uses that in very high priority. Then she's got a 3x3 square attack, which is a very rare pattern. It's not something we see often, and I think outside of a limit burst, it is the first unit that has that, so it's pretty cool. The ability will negate counters for 3 turns. I love this. No reflex means this is a really good ability. Then deals damage, and then increases her own defense by 20. So I often in my builds, I'm going to have her around 30 defense or so. With this, she goes above 50, and it's kind of insane. Then she's got a physical barrier for 50% 3 times that also increases AoE resistance around her. This is a really good ability. Physical barriers for 50% are already great by themselves, so having another effect on top is just insane. Then she's got the Stormbrand attack once it's EX upgraded, which decreases single target resistance before dealing damage. So it's a 165 mod, and all the abilities in her main job are 165 mod, which while not low, is not the top. We often see units that have 200 mod or even higher sometimes. Like Ibarra's Izai. Because of the low-ish mod she has, her damage won't be that insane, but this one, because it decreases single target resistance before dealing damage, will hit quite hard. It also heals her for a percentage of her HP, so that is pretty fun. Since she has 10,000 HP, you can expect 2k heals, even more if you have healing power up in your runes, and then it has plus 30% hit chance, which paired with her 30 accuracy up buff now makes her fairly accurate. Again, there's no guaranteed hit, so I would still spec her with an Alexandrite ring or something else if you're fighting a pure evasion team, but against teams that aren't maxed out on evasion, these will be enough to land hits reliably. And then finally, her 120 ability is quite important for her if you're fighting enemies that have barriers, because it is a barrier break, one of the greatest things to have when you're an attacker, and then it increases her own debuff resistance for a couple turns, which is interesting, but it's not that game-changing. It's really the barrier break that's key here. So overall, pretty solid kit. I think it's very well rounded by her Limit Burst, which is another AoE option that will increase defense penetration for it by 50. So for this, you essentially have 90 defense penetration on this hit, and if you have a rune for the extra 10, you just ignore defense with that attack, which is pretty fun. And then after the hit, you're going to decrease slash resistance, which is a good thing, but with her vision card and her sword that gives her a lot of slash resistance penetration, she already has easily 76 slash resistance penetration in a fight, so it's not that necessary of an effect for herself. It could help her partners, though. The precursor sub-job, I don't think you'll ever run. It's really weak compared to the other two. It does give an attack that decreases critical evasion and deals damage, and another one that has a chance to confuse. But let's be honest, you are going to want to run Paladin most of the times. What Paladin brings you is first a range 5 attack, which is Taunting Blade. It is very AP hungry, but it is a 200 mod, which is higher than most things in her kit, and it has more range. And then it also brings the Immortal Spirit ability, which gives her Courage, a super high value and efficient in nearly every matchup. So I think this is the sub-job you'll run in almost every map. And then if Courage is ever banned and you don't want to run this, you could go Thief. What Thief gives you is good synergy with evasion units, I guess, with Steel Vision. But mostly you're getting Sneak Attack, which from the back is a guaranteed hit. So it's another way to deal with evasion units, and since she's going to have move 4 in most fights, getting to the enemy's back isn't impossible. So that is another pretty solid option, but I think Paladin wins out in most matchups. Now, today, my guild did a lot of testing with Esther teams. Now, we were using the map that gives accuracy up plus 40 for these units. So our Esther did not run an Alexandrite ring, our Ibarra did not either, and we landed most hits against light teams. I figure remove the map buff, add these Alex rings, and it's fairly even. So I'll talk from this standpoint, but just so you're aware, this is my disclaimer. And then we've been hitting light teams and winning almost every match. But against Earth teams, we would lose every match, just killing one of them. So she is very strong, but she's not going to have no counters at all. The team that seemed to have the best success was the one with Esther, Charlotte, and Ibarra. The idea is Charlotte is super hard to remove from the board, and then once she's dead, there's still a super tanky Esther in front of the enemy team that can heal back and has good AoE resistance, so any chip damage she took while Charlotte was alive is gone by the time they turn to hit her. And then meanwhile, Ibarra just one-shots everybody she hits, so you have a very powerful damage threat in the back. We've also tested a team where we would run no tank, but instead have Vow of Love on Esther, and to be honest, that worked surprisingly well. The fact that she takes the first 2 hits before they move to squishier targets was quite useful, and while this did not outperform a team with Charlotte, I think it was an interesting strategy. I would love to see players trying out shenanigans like this. The other team that was pretty good was Esther, Cloud, and Charlotte. The thing that I dislike a little bit about this is that you're banking everything on physical attacks, and while both units have good defense penetrations and ways to ignore slash resistance, you're still using the same type of damage, so a team that's really built against physical damage will be able to hold your damage very well. And then against Earth, Ibarra is really key, because the Earth units are going to have really good lightning resistance in general, and she can decrease that in an AoE, really enabling you to have a shot at killing one. So if you're running the Cloud version and you're ever facing an Earth team, you won't be able to do as much, I think, to them. With that said, let's talk builds, and you'll have on screen I have 2 lightning partners, so this is factored in. I also have runes equipped, and I'll show them on the next slide. But in here, we have a Esther with 10,000 HP, 1600 attack, 37 defense, 18 spirit, 67 slash resistance, and then really high mods overall. So when I'm saying she's hard to remove, I'm not joking. She is very, very bulky. I've seen an Oberon limit break her in our tests, and he only did 3,000 damage to her, so yeah, very impressive. And then she still has 104 agility, which is very high in a lot of compared to a lot of other units, so that's also really good. you could change a couple things, but the reason I like the vision cards I put here is because we have AoE resistance 20% and single target resistance as well. So she's going to be very accurate and has a lot of mitigation tools that don't even appear in the stat line we see here, making her further hard to kill. I think the runes you'll want on her, well, the ones I'm planning on building at least, is on the defensive side, a Spirit Upset. The reason for that is she already has super high defense, and I would love to have a little bit of mitigation against magical type attacks, just in case that's what I'm facing. And also, the Spirit set gives you healing power up 10, which will help her heal back more from the move that heals 20% of her max HP. So there are a couple scenarios. That extra 500-600 HP she heals could potentially save her, and that is really good. Then on the offensive side, I would probably just run accuracy up. As I said, she is accurate, but she's not able to hit top tier evasion teams unless you're really focusing on accuracy. With a full accuracy build though, you will hit them with pretty much anything in your kit, which I think is a huge boon. So I would go for accuracy on that side. Then in terms of passives, of course, defensive side, you always want HP and luck. And then I would probably focus on her resistances because since they're already so high, it just further makes it harder for enemies to hit you unless they have really high penetration. So that's the route I would take in a nutshell. On the offensive side, 20% attack, of course, and 20% acquired AP since she is so AP hungry. And then the ones that I would love is slash attack because you're using a sword that doesn't give you any slash attack. Chance the counter doesn't activate because she has... Yes, she has an ability that cancels reactions, but she won't necessarily use this one first, and reflex is just a pain. So I want to take that out of the way as much as I can. And then finally, 10% healing power, again, because healing, she has an ability that self-heals, so that just makes it much better. And 15% dexterity, because it increases her rate of critical, and she has some abilities that are dependent on critical to have their additional effects. Now, let's talk AI a little bit. On the Paladin subjob, you never want Divine Grace. I think this ability is much worse than anything else in her kit. And then if you're fighting an evasion team, you need to have the accuracy up buff by the time you meet them. And because of that, you might have to turn Barrier off. What her AI loves doing is using Barrier first, then using Bells, and only then using her buff that increases her accuracy. If the map is short enough, you will be meeting the enemy team before you're using all of this. Now, if the map is really long and you do have time to use everything, leave the Barrier up. It's super good. But I think in most matchups, if you know you're going to be fighting an evasion team, just turn off the Barrier. It's really good, but evasion teams are usually Starlet Elena team who hits with magical attacks, so the physical barrier doesn't affect it as much. So I think it's not that big of a loss, and you'll have a better performance overall. Finally, do I think she's worth pulling? Well, I've already pulled for her. I definitely love her stat line, and I love units that just have high stats and no gimmicks. She doesn't rely on status effects, she doesn't rely on RNG that much against evasion. All she has is really good stats and a sword, and she's going to hit enemies with standard type abilities, and I love that simplicity of gameplay. I think she has solid long-term value just because her stats are above most of what I see on JP right now with the unit releases, so that's really, really good. So if you own Charlotte and Ibarra, great unit. I think you'll have a very strong team. If you own Cloud and or Renan, they're also great alternatives. I think there are some vision cards you definitely want to get the most out of her. The Aigaion vision card, which gives you HP and slash attack and accuracy, is going to be great. Ibarra's vision card for extra AoE resistance and dex, which increases critical rate, is really good. If you have the Guard Scorpion, it's just crazy, right? You're getting attack ops, slash resistance, just generally increasing both your offense and defense together. And then you kind of have to pull for her own vision card, which increases single target resistance, gives her a ton of attack on the individual slot. So there are a lot of VCs needed to max her. Unfortunately, a lot of those are time limited. It is just how hard the vision is in general. But if you have the setup for her, I think she's kind of a must pull because she will be much better than Cloud in most teams, or can be a good replacement for whoever third lightning unit you're currently using that's neither Ibarra or Charlotte. With that said, I think this video is a lot longer than my usual. I try to cover more stuff. Do you like this a little bit more in-depth analysis, or do you prefer that I just go straight to the point? Let me know, and I'll be back with another video shortly. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you soon.